My joke is when people call and ask me,
Late call, we got a resolver under contract. We're going to close in probably 2 weeks. When they pull up in, a $200,000 car and they're wearing Gucci from
the problems, and there are some in this industry. Yeah.
Hello, friends. Today we're sitting down with a very, very important person over at Skyline Properties, Eric Johnson, managing broker, somebody who's been in the industry for more years than I've probably been alive. No, not yet. And today we're going to be talking about a little bit of a controversial subject and something that's been changing in the real estate industry, and that is compensation, the NAR lawsuit. How is that affecting us as real estate agents and the future of the real estate industry as a whole? So Eric, thank you so much for joining. And before we dive into the meat of this conversation, I would love to let the viewers know who you are, when you started in real estate, and then what do you do at Skyline Properties?
Sure. Yeah, so I've been in real estate, so I've been licensed for 20 years. Prior to that, I worked for a home builder and helped him sell new homes. Okay. But it wasn't in a licensed type of position. I was just kind of there as a liaison, if you will. But I've wanted to be in real estate ever since I bought my first house. I was going to give away my age, man, back in 1986.
Wow.
Yeah. But I didn't really have I wasn't ready to become a full-time, real estate agent until I was into my 40s. And so I was kind of a late life changeover. So it was 20 years ago. I made the decision to jump from that construction business into going to work in production real estate.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how long have you been at Skyline Properties?
Skyline, I've been for, I'm just a couple months shy of 6 years now as the designated broker at Skyline.
Designated broker, okay.
Yeah, so that's a lofty title. It means that I answer to the state and I answer to the MLS, and I'm kind of the buck stops here as far as any compliance and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's what the title's really all about. But really, I serve our brokers. We've got 1,200 brokers, and we've got 5 offices, and I oversee all 5 of those offices. So I answer to all of our brokers. My joke is when people call and ask me, or they'll say to me, "Hey, boss," it's like, no, I work for you guys. So, yeah.
So you help oversee 1,200 brokers at Skyline Properties. So.
Yeah.
I mean, you see all the scenarios from the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well,
yes.
Typically, you only get involved when it's ugly.
Unfortunately, I hear way more of the ugly than I do the good, but every once in a while I hear from a broker who just wants to do a high five over their first sale or their 100th sale or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for a lot of what I deal with are the problems, and there are some in this industry. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there always are. Yeah,
right.
There always are when you're exchanging hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars.
Right, exactly.
Something's always going to come up. So, I'd love to talk about this NAR lawsuit. Now, some people they have a good view on it. Some people have a negative. Some people have no idea what's going on and what it means.
Right.
And I'd love to better understand from your perspective, what is this lawsuit? What was it about? Maybe not, every single detail of it, mm-hmm. but a high overview of what the NAR lawsuit was, what it's about.
Yeah, it was NAR, and there were several very, very, very large brokerages back east, and some brokerages that are all over the country that were involved in this thing. It's tough because what it really came down to is the allegation was that buyers didn't know, that they didn't understand that sellers were paying mm-hmm. the buyer, their broker, their commission. And so it was a transparency thing. I don't know how that happens because here it's pretty obvious mm-hmm. how a buyer's agent gets paid. Mm-hmm. Most buyers understand that the seller is paying it, that mm-hmm. you're not, it's, I just don't know what happened there. Mm-hmm. And this isn't to fault NAR or any of the other organizations mm-hmm. involved, but somewhere their legal team, they missed something that mm-hmm. didn't resonate with the juries involved. Mm-hmm. And the juries felt that, yes, they were culpable for deceiving the public. Mm-hmm. So there's been a big adjustment from there. So kind of moving forward here in the Northwest, We've got the Northwest Multiple Listing Service. They've been phenomenal about keeping up with what's going on in that lawsuit from literally from the minute it was filed. And then ongoing, and they've made changes as you've seen on some of the forums we've had to roll through changes over the last few years, and right down to within the last month we've had a change too. And those are all adjustments to make sure that we are being transparent with our buyers. It seems like it's really tough to go in there, and because most of us were handshake agreement folks with our buyers in the past. I'm sure you probably did that.
Oh, yeah,
it's like, I'm going to show you houses, and don't worry about it. I got it all figured out. And now we have to actually get an agreement with them. They have to agree to pay you, or the seller doesn't have to pay you. So it's very different, and the sellers have to agree to everything. So it's now contractual. It's no longer
Verbal,
something
yeah,
where
you have to have
it's-
something on paper, yeah.
Yeah, it's transparent is
Yeah.
what the idea is. Yeah.
So let me run you through the timeline that I understand. I've been tracking the news a little bit. So what ended up happening is a seller and a group of sellers got together and said, hey, we're actually paying the selling agent and we're paying the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent is negotiating against us.
Right.
But we're paying them. How is
Right.
that fair, right?
Yep.
And so they went in there and there was a class action suit. You said multiple brokerages, National Association of Realtors was sued. And some of them, from what I remember, they basically settled. And then the NAR was fined. And then there was a lot of changes that came into the real estate industry. And I guess the biggest complaint that I heard, and I didn't understand this because here in Washington State, the Northwest MLS, very transparent.
Right.
You literally have a line when you sign a listing agreement that says, we're paying the selling agent this much and we're paying the buyer's agent this much. And it's
Exactly.
always been negotiable. The buyers and the sellers could always negotiate.
Exactly.
And the buyer 10 years ago could have said to his buyer's agent, hey, I know you're going to get paid. I'd like, to get this much back in, let's say, credit from that compensation. But what ended up happening, especially in these Midwest states, from what I understand, on their listing agreement, it just says that whole 6.
Right.
And then that listing agent gets to decide, so it felt like collusion. And it kind of makes sense, right? Where if you're the one that's deciding how much everybody gets paid, that's a little bit unfair. But I guess the whole point of the matter is these things were always negotiable. And I feel like in these other states, other than Washington, they did a poor job of communicating that to buyers and sellers.
Yep, that's pretty accurate. I mean, that was the lack of transparency is what they're calling it, but what it means is it wasn't made clear. And I've actually talked to, I know some managers in other places and what have you, and I was talking to one, and he was telling me that one of his agents who worked for him said that the people in the car driving around looking at houses said to him that, well, your company pays you, right? And they just thought that they were like a salaried employee. So they weren't feeling bad about looking at a lot of houses and this and that because they thought this guy's on a salary.
Yeah.
They didn't understand. And that's unfortunately the reason that this whole thing is out there, is that people didn't understand who was getting paid and who by and how that all worked.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing at the end of the day for agents, especially buyers agents, because now they have to have that conversation and understanding with their buyers that, look, I don't make a single cent. In fact, I lose money before I even sell you or help you purchase a home.
Right.
And I do think that some of the old ways of doing real estate, and it's seen more in the Midwest because I own property in Indiana, for example.
Okay.
And I'm a real estate agent, right? So I didn't have any connections over there. I went to good old Google and I called a couple agents. And I'm like, I explained to them, hey, I'm an agent. I have this home. It's been renovated. It's ready to go. It's vacant. I want to list it. And they would say some outrageous numbers. They'd be like 8%,
Wow.
8%, 7%. And I'm like, okay, first of all, let's negotiate this.
Yeah.
And some of them would just say, I'm not even going to do it.
Yeah.
So I understand where kind of the sentiment comes from the Midwest, but I know here in Washington State, the way that the MLS is, the way that things are done here, it's so much better, so much more transparent. And I think in general, having that conversation is going to lead to a lot more happier buyers and a lot more happier sellers.
Yeah,
so with
agreed.
this lawsuit happening, do you think that sellers should stop offering compensation? What do you think?
No, in fact, I think that's it would be a really bad idea in my mind. Part of it is the buyers. They're already, they're going to have to pay a down payment. They're going to have to pay closing costs. They're tapping their bank account pretty hard already. If they had to pay their agent, even if it was 1% or 2%, it's a lot of extra money on top of what they're already pouring into this purchase. The only way they can finance that in is if it's built into the price of the home, which it currently is. So say a home is $500,000 and an agent's going to get paid 2%. Well, 2% of that 500 is going to go to maybe both agents. It depends on how that's all negotiated with the seller. But who is ultimately paying that is the buyer. So he is still paying his agent. He's just doing it in a way that people aren't seeing because the money comes out at the close and it looks like it comes from seller proceeds, but the seller proceeds come from the buyer's funds. They're getting the loan for that amount. So that 2% that they're paying their agent can be financed the way it is now. If that were to go away, if a seller doesn't pay that, hopefully the seller would list their home for 2% less because the idea is that the agent is going to have to dip into their own pocket for that money. So to me, it just makes sense to do it this way. From where else is a buyer going to be able to finance, that 1% to 2%, 3%, whatever it might be, although the interest rates appear to be high right now because we got really spoiled a couple of years ago. But seriously, where are you going to be able to finance anything for 6%? Right, which is about where we're at right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be just extremely challenging for buyers in general because most buyers are coming from a place where the reality is it's cheaper to rent than to own, at least in our region right now. So number one, they're going from, let's say, a $3,000 monthly payment to a $4,500 monthly payment. Then they barely have enough for their down payment. They barely have enough for closing costs in a competitive market that we're in. Sure, right now in this season, we're seeing homes stand for a little bit longer, but just wait until spring, as you and I know, when the homes are standing on the market for 3 days and they're going like this. How is it going to be possible for buyers to purchase homes? We're talking about first-time home buyers, maybe even second-time home buyers, people who are not these investors that have all this money that can go out there and buy. And to me, it almost seems like part of the discussion brings a disadvantage to the people who have the least amount of access to funds. Because those people are not going to get served because you can't pay for the service. So sure, you can find the information online and you can go through these hard things, but here's the reality. You and I drive cars. I'm pretty sure if your engine is going to break, you're not going to do the research online on how to change your own engine and
not
can
anymore.
I rebuild it or can I do this or can I do that? That's the reality. Me and you aren't going to do that. No matter how smart we are, we're going to go take it to a professional who's going to get it done.
Exactly.
I think that's the same thing here today, where it's like the people who have the least amount of access to information or the funds, they're going to get, excuse my language, screwed over at the end. And they're going to have less chances to become homeowners. So
I'm actually kind of terrified of, there's something going on in California right now where there's a lot of real estate brokers who are advertising, we'll take care of you, and they're the listing brokers who are saying, we'll take care of the buyer, and they're doing dual agency. And they are, so they're trying to push the buyer agent out of the whole picture. The problem there is I think a buyer does need representation. They don't always understand it. It's the analogy I've heard is that, and I know Boeing has a bad name sometimes lately, but a Boeing airplane can just about land itself without a pilot there, but it can certainly handle most of the flight by itself. It's when something goes wrong that the pilot becomes really, really important. And in a real estate transaction, it's not necessarily that things are going to go wrong. It's just that things are not going to be in the favor of the buyer. We want that buyer to have that representation, somebody to tell them what it is they can do, and help them through that entire process. So it's not about the finding the house. Yeah, anybody can find a house online these days. It's what do you do when you actually want that house? How do you compete with other offers without having an agent who can communicate with the other agent involved in the process. And that goes down to all of the negotiating all the way from start to finish. And when things go wrong, it's really important to have somebody like yourself there who you're their advocate. You're in their corner with them, and you're fighting for them.
Now, I think 100% in real estate transactions, it's not necessarily like anybody can put a house up for sale if they learn how to input the forms correctly.
Right.
Anybody can write a contract, but it takes a specific individual who is going to get the buyer or the seller from point A to Z through the roadblocks and obstacles of getting their desired goal. And I might be breaking a rule here by telling you this. So I'm actually dealing with a transaction right now where the buyer's agent is really new. And she is kind of freaking out. So I said, hey, if you're okay with it, let's get on a 3-way call. And how about I explain to them how to get here? And guess what? We got it done.
Right.
And with her, it just felt like a wall because it's her first time, not to say that first time agents, are bad. It's her first time. I have a seller who knows what he wants.
Right.
And I know that I could get these buyers there and I could get the seller there, but this agent is just having a hard time. So after a 3-way call, we got it resolved. We're under contract. We're going to close in probably 2 weeks. Everything is smooth as butter. So really, it really does matter who you have representing you. And it's in those moments of that turbulence when the plane is starting to go sideways that you need somebody to take action and take course. So
that's it.
With kind of the changes in the lawsuit, obviously changes in the industry, there's a rise to these no-cost or low-cost flat fee brokerages that are starting to emerge in places like California from what I'm hearing as well. Do you think that is the future of real estate where it's just going to be like a flat fee, you hire somebody and they just get it done for you? Or maybe technology is going to take over, we're going to have AI write our contracts and you're going to type into ChatGPT, hey, the seller said this, what should I say next?
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen?
I do think that there's probably going to be, we call it in the industry commission compression. We saw it where everybody was getting 3% a few years ago. Back when I started, 3% was the most common amount that you would get, either a buyer agent or a listing agent. Now it's creeping down to, it's at 2.5%. Is the 60% of all listings are offering 2.5% to a buyer agent, and 60% of all listings have the seller giving 2.5% to the listing agent as well. I think that's going to continue to come down, especially when we see the home prices that we're dealing with. It's 2.5% of $2 million is a lot of money, and so I think that's going to be compressed. Flat fee, I think, has some possibility, but that model has been tried in a lot of markets, and I know this because part of my background, prior to coming to Skyline, I was the designated broker for a flat fee brokerage.
Oh, really?
That flat fee brokerage is now out of business nationwide. They had offices in 20 cities, including Seattle, and that's the one I managed. And the company itself was losing money pretty much on every listing.
Really?
And there's other companies out there right now that are pretty big name companies that advertise a lower listing commission. Those companies are struggling to get into profitability. And I won't name that company, but it's a very well-known company, and it struggles to be profitable. It's trying to, and they're opening up in more and more markets, but they're also putting more caveats on the low price listing all the time.
Yeah.
You've got to buy with them if you want to sell with them at that rate, that kind of thing. So I think there's going to be the public doesn't always see this, but it actually, there are a lot of expenses involved. There's a lot of risk involved in being an agent. If you're a buyer's agent, I mean, my worst ever, it was early in my career, I did 150 showings for one buyer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I made about $1 an hour on that transaction, but, the other side of that is I've had some where you do one showing and within hours you're under contract, so it can work both ways, but there is some risk involved. And then with us, if you're a listing broker, the the time, the energy, and everything that goes into that, the number sellers don't always see it. If you're good, they're not feeling the pain that you're going through while you're listing a house. I know you do a lot of listings. You've probably been through this where you're fielding dozens and dozens of calls and you're spending hours and hours and hours on the phone. That's just while it's being listed. But getting to that point where it's listed and helping the seller through all those things, they see the time that you might give them face to face in the house. But there's probably 6 hours on either side of that of work that's happening every time you meet with them and all of that. So it's I think that the public, at least here, my impression is that most people do value the time that agents put into it. There's very few people pushing for a huge reduction. Some of them do want to see some of it come back to them. Buyers, for example, they're paying a ton of money. You figure if they're doing 20% down on $1 million house, it's $200,000. And then they're paying closing costs. It's going to be probably another 2 to 3%. They're getting hit pretty hard. If they can get a little help from what you're making out of the deal, they're happy with that. So I think we're going to continue to see some compression. We're going to see buyers asking for rebates. I think sellers are going to be, at some point, they're going to say enough's enough. They're going to say, I'll pay you $20,000 to list my house, not 60. That kind of thing. And then it's going to be up to the agents as to what they want to do. But there's also a quality involved. And there's certain agents who are busy enough that they're going to turn away the folks who are putting on the compression. And so those folks who are compressing the commissions, not that it's, like you said, somebody with one transaction, it's not a bad thing. Everybody has to start somewhere. But they're not going to get the people who have as much experience. They're not going to be able to find those folks. And if the market keeps shifting the way it has been, it's going to become a little more of a buyer's market. Right now, we're still in a seller's market, traditionally, because we're still under 4 months worth of inventory. We're at 2.5 right now for the most part, most of our markets. But when we get to that 4 to 6 month mark, we're actually starting to transition into a buyer's market, and that's going to be when I think more and more things will probably change at that point.
I think I do agree about the compression of commissions. And when I became an agent, I didn't really understand how the commissions worked either. I became an agent because I had a very poor buying experience, and I thought this needs to be done better, especially with my background in tech. And sometimes when I see agents who are wearing, and it's okay to do this, but when they're wearing like Gucci from their head to their toe, that I understand why there's a lawsuit. I get it. When they pull up in, a $200,000 car and they're wearing Gucci from, their toes to their head, and they're trying to sell you a $600,000 house.
Right.
I get why people are frustrated, and I personally try to revolt against that because I think that's wrong. And in many instances, even myself, I look at the commission check, and I asked my admin, transaction coordinator who helps me out. I said, "Hey, you help a lot of agents. Do any of them, give their buyers back this much?" And she's like, "No, only if there's a thing wrong with the inspection, or if they need to get the deal done." And to me, it's like, no. In honesty, in our market, we are making a lot of money. And we're making sometimes absurd amount of money. And sometimes it's super hard. It's challenging. Like, people don't know the things that we go through. You ask my wife, she probably isn't happy that I'm an agent. Because I'm on the phone with the client at 9 o'clock, not paying attention to what's going on at home. But the commissions do feel a little bit ridiculous in some extent, and I think consumers are realizing that, and they're going to adjust to what the value exchange is.
Yeah. There's a point where
there
will be a tipping point, but I do think it'll continue to be something where a good agent can earn a good income. It's just maybe not quite as crazy as big as it was.
3%, on $1 million listing, of course. So tell me this: do you think that real estate agents are still going to exist in 10, 15 years? Or do you think we're just going to be all on ChatGPT telling it to write us contracts? So it's going to be like, what is it? Like Expedia replaced, what do you call those? Tour people that set up stuff for you?
Right,
you know?
right. There are people who go out there. They're showing agents, basically. Yeah. And there's a few companies and a few teams and things like that who that's what they do. It's basically a door opener. They're not involved in the negotiations. They're not going to know a thing about the house they're showing. They're going to open the door and say, you wandered through. They're going to make sure you don't walk out with people's possessions. And then they're going to lock the door. And then you'll talk to their primary agent.
Yeah.
Which is fine. You know, I don't have any problem with that model. I know personally, I'm very hands-on. I want to be with my client in the house. So here's going back to your primary question, do I think it's ever going to be AI-driven and all of that? I think it's a very human thing. People want to, they need to use, I jokingly say, all 5 senses. I've been in one house you could taste. Anyway, so but all 5 senses are going to be involved. And that includes being able to see the neighbors and seeing what's going on around it. The photos on a listing, even if you know, you've got 360-degree everything going on, you're not necessarily going to get the sense of space that you get when you're actually personally there, and you're not going to hear the sounds in the neighborhood or what's going on in the house. You're not going to know that the house, you know, you're not going to be able to smell that mold issue or something like that, or whatever it might be. I do think it's very hands-on. I've actually had one client who needed to touch the paint. He had really clean hands. He wasn't leaving fingerprints. He had a thing against textured paint, so he would actually touch the walls whenever he walked into a house to see how textured it was. And if it was too much, he actually turned and walked out a couple of times.
Oh, wow,
so, you know, you get all sorts. I think it's a very human thing. It's a very emotional thing. It's not it's not just a business. There are some people who can treat it as that. But for the most part, you know, you're going to be raising a family there. You're going to be, you know, your kids, whether you've got them or not yet, you know, if that's your dream, you know, you need to know that everybody's secure, and that includes, you know, health-wise and you know, neighborhood-wise and everything else. So I think it's going to continue to be a very hands-on industry. Personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't get away from. I work with a lot of first-time home buyers, and there is a lot of fear in this process. A lot of unknowns, a lot of opinions. You know, the process of buying a home 20 years ago is much different than it is today. The market is different. There's, you know, the common joke of having the dad come to the home inspection is a deal killer because, you know, he bought his home in 1994 for $50 and a, you know, packet of grapes, you know, versus now it's a couple $100,000. So it's really tough. It definitely is really tough, and it's a very personal experience for everybody. Scary, nerve-wracking. Some people need hand-holding. Some people are a little bit more confident. But overall, I think regardless of their confidence, they want somebody taking care of it. And they want somebody with that professional opinion and professional work, because this is something they do, 3 times in their life? Really, at most for most people.
On average,
three times.
Right.
So you know, if you do something 3 times, you're no matter what, you're still going to feel nervous every single time you do it. So we'll see how the industry goes. Hopefully, we're not replaced by a bot, by a little robot that's opening the doors and writing the contracts and talking to another robot on behalf of somebody else. But I think we've only got the best days ahead of us. Eric, thank you.
You know, talking to you, you know, I'm going to interject there just because, you know, I know the level of service that you offer your buyers. I know the level of service I offer to my buyers. The door openers, they're not going through the house and spotting stuff. When I'm in there, unfortunately, I'm my own worst enemy. I can imagine you're probably this way too. I have talked more buyers out of buying the house we're in. I'm not there to sell them a house. I'm there to help them, counsel them through finding the house that's right for them. And that's where I think there's no bot that's going to be able to do that. Door openers can't do that. So then I appreciate, you know, the level of service that you offer because of, you know, just exactly that type of thing.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, there's been moments where I've walked into a house and there's this mold has a very interesting smell to it, and you know right away. you just know, like, hey, we're going to get to the inspection, it's going to be mold. Like,
Yeah.
I already know. So you warn them ahead of time about these things. There's so many things that you can't put, nobody else is going to tell you other than somebody that's seen it before. And I think that's saved people their health. It's helped, their personal relationships. I mean, there's some things that you have to walk people off of bridges sometimes, and you have to sometimes work with them, and sometimes they won't listen. There have been moments where people haven't listened,
Right.
and then they've regretted it, unfortunately. But that just reinforces for every good agent to not be afraid to speak up to your clients, not be afraid to guide them in that right direction.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eric, for sitting down.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah.
It's been exciting. Let's keep this going, and we'll have Skyline flourish. We'll flourish, and hopefully we're not replaced by robots in a couple of years.
No, I really I appreciate you and all you do. You're just, if I can just throw in a good word for you, and that is, I hear from you a lot, which is great. It's the agents that I don't hear from that scare me. When you always come to me when you've got something that's new or whatever it might be, and we always find a good work out for it. So I appreciate you. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure.